She woke up in a luxury hotel bed, and her billionaire boss was right next to her. No memory, no warning, just silence, and his eyes staring at her. What happened that night would change everything. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Let's dive into the story together. The night was quiet, with golden lights from the oceanfront resort flickering across the dark velvet waves. And down a long, polished hallway, Lily staggered slightly, one heel slipping with every step. The overhead lights cast a warm blur across her wrinkled office dress, and her once perfectly neat hair had loosened into a soft, wild halo. The faint scent of wine clung to her skin, blending with the salt in the breeze drifting in from the balcony at the end of the corridor. The company party had been a resounding success, not because of the deals, not because of the speeches, but because Lily, the quiet, diligent assistant who never broke protocol, had taken a third glass of champagne. And now the world tilted with every blink. She remembered the elevator. She remembered walking too far. She remembered a door left slightly ajar, and then a bed that felt like it was made of clouds and whispered, "Rest here, just for a minute." Morning light broke through thick hotel curtains, soft and golden. Lily opened her eyes slowly, as if emerging from underwater, half hungover, half dreaming, and then completely awake. The silk sheet slid off her shoulder, and next to her was Henry Ford. Henry, CEO, 35, stone-faced, intimidating, a man whose gaze could silence a boardroom with a single glance, and now, lying next to her, on the same bed, elbow resting on the pillow, head tilted, eyes calm, as if he were studying a misplaced item on his agenda. Lily froze. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, her gaze locked on his. And then, to her horror, he smiled. Not smug, not shocked, just amused. "If you're planning to use my room again," he said dryly, "next time try knocking first." A joke, a subtle one, but it landed like thunder in her chest. She bolted upright, clutching the bedsheet to her chest like armor. I have no idea how this happened. I swear I thought this was—" "Your room?" he finished. "It's down the hall, last door on the left." He said it without judgment, just a fact, like he'd already solved the mystery, and found it slightly entertaining. Lily wanted the floor to swallow her whole, but the hardwood looked unforgiving, and Henry's gaze even more so. "I'm sorry, I'll leave, right now." "No rush," he replied casually, "but for the record, you do snore. A little." Was that teasing? Impossible. Henry Ford didn't tease. But then he rose from the bed, unhurried, grabbing his robe with effortless grace, like a man in complete control of everything, including awkward mornings like this one. And Lily? She was left standing in the middle of the room, heart racing, hair a mess, dignity nowhere to be found. Somewhere outside, the waves kept crashing steadily against the shore. But inside that suite, something had already shifted. Not because of what had happened, but because of what had begun. The rumors started quietly. A few whispers over morning coffee, an arched brow during the investors' brunch. But like all things whispered with curiosity, it spread faster than wildfire. Someone had seen Lily leaving Henry Ford's suite at dawn, disheveled, barefoot, quiet. They didn't see the panic in her eyes, the confusion on her face. They saw a story. And investors? They didn't question it. In fact, they embraced it. To the board members who barely smiled, and the venture capitalists who measured worth in spreadsheets, the idea that Henry, cold, brilliant, ruthlessly efficient, might be romantically involved with his assistant wasn't scandalous. It was reassuring. Finally, someone had melted the ice. Finally, the man had a heart. And in the sterile world of billion-dollar deals, A heart was surprisingly good for business. Henry noticed the change almost immediately. Smiles came easier. Agreements moved faster. Hands shook with more warmth. For once, the room leaned toward him. And so, later that day, standing by the panoramic window of his suite, watching waves collapse against the shore, Henry made a decision. Lily knocked before entering this time, still shaken from the morning, still unsure how to even look him in the eye. He didn't turn. "They think we're together." His voice was calm, distant. "I know," she said, stiff. "I've heard the whispers, too." He finally turned to face her, expression unreadable. "And oddly enough, it's working in our favor." She blinked. "What?" "Investors are more comfortable. The mood is lighter." Callahan actually smiled at me. He took a step forward. "They think I'm stable, settled, trustworthy." "Because you slept next to your assistant?" she asked, incredulous. "Because they think I care about something other than control," he said flatly. There was a long pause. Then came the part she didn't expect. "I need you to play along." She stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for the punchline. "You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend? For 2 more days," he replied. "Just until the closing dinner." "Absolutely not," she said without hesitation. "You're asking me to fake a relationship in front of every executive in the building." He didn't argue, didn't flinch. He simply said, "You're the only one I trust to do it convincingly." Those words, they hit differently. Not because of the compliment, but because of the implication. If not her, it would be someone else, someone willing, someone dangerous. Lily's thoughts raced. This was wrong, risky, a bad idea on every level, but underneath her resistance, a seed of doubt took root. Does he need me for this? Or does he just need someone? And when she looked up and saw his face, calm, composed, but just slightly guarded, she knew. Henry Ford was betting everything on perception. And for once, he wasn't in control. She exhaled slowly. The air between them grew still. 2 days, she muttered. That's all. His nod was barely noticeable. But something passed through his eyes. Not quite relief. More like confirmation. And just like that, the game began. A perfectly rehearsed act for the cameras. Smiles that weren't real. Touches that shouldn't mean anything. Laughter shared in front of strangers. But in private, they both knew the stakes were about to get a lot higher than just a deal. Part 3. Under the golden light of the ballroom chandeliers, the evening shimmered with quiet elegance. Laughter floated above the clinking of glasses and the soft rustle of silk gowns. Henry Ford stood tall in his tailored black suit, a glass of champagne in hand, his presence as controlled as ever, except for the one difference that no one could ignore. His hand was resting gently on the small of Lily's back. He wasn't holding her. He wasn't guiding her. He was simply there, close, still, present. And when she turned her head slightly, looking up at him as someone nearby greeted them, he didn't smile with his mouth. He smiled with his eyes. To the crowd, it looked polished, effortless. The cold executive and his charming assistant, now a poised, elegant partner by his side. But inside Lily's chest, everything was off balance. This wasn't acting, or if it was getting dangerously good. Earlier that day, he'd brushed a strand of hair off her cheek in the hallway. Nothing theatrical, nothing loud, just a brief, grounding gesture. Her heart had stumbled. And now, here in this room full of polished power and rehearsed charm, every glance he gave her seemed too warm, too deep, too real. She didn't know when the script had slipped from her hands. At one point, during a conversation with a pair of investors, Henry leaned in and whispered softly near her ear. Too close, too quiet for anyone else to hear. "Relax your shoulders," he said. "You're standing like you're about to bolt." His breath brushed her skin. His tone, playful, protective. Lily barely breathed. She adjusted her posture, nodded politely at the couple before them, and let out the smallest, shakiest laugh. The kind of laugh that betrayed nothing to the world, but everything to herself. He was doing it again, making her forget it was a lie. Later that night, as the event wound down and guests began to drift out into the velvet dusk, Henry took her hand in a casual, practiced gesture. But the moment their fingers touched, his thumb brushed against hers, just once, almost imperceptibly, a touch too slow, a pause too long. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked at him, and for a second, just a second, he wasn't playing a part. Neither of them were. They didn't say anything as they walked toward the elevator. The silence between them pulsed like a living thing. But in that silence, something unspoken curled beneath the surface. A quiet confession neither dared speak out loud. Later, alone in her room, Lily stood in front of the mirror, dress half unzipped, eyes fixed on her own reflection. "Is this still the plan?" she whispered. "Or am I already too deep in it?" She didn't have the answer. And deep down, she suspected. Neither did he. The ocean whispered against the shore, a soft and steady rhythm that wrapped the night in something close to stillness. Overhead, the moon cast a wide silver arc across the water, and the salt-laced wind rustled the tall grass that lined the edge of the path. Far from the resort's golden lights and clinking glasses, Lily and Henry walked in silence. Two shadows stretched long against the sand. Neither of them spoke, but the space between them felt louder than words. At times their hands brushed, lightly, unintentionally, but neither pulled away. There was nothing performative here, no one to impress, no roles to play, just the sound of their footsteps on the path, the hush of the waves, and the unspoken weight of something shifting. Lily's hair danced in the breeze, loose and wild, and for the first time in days, her shoulders weren't squared like armor. She wasn't trying to control her posture, or her breath, or her eyes. And Henry, usually composed to the point of stillness, had his hands in his pockets and a slight crease in his brow. Not from stress, but from something he couldn't quite name. The walk stretched on, timeless. Then, just as the trail opened to a wider view of the dark, endless sea, Henry stopped. He didn't face her, just looked out at the water for a long moment. "I don't want this to end." The words came quiet, unforced, not calculated or clever, just real. Lily's heart caught, because the moment was simple and still and dangerous. She turned her head, studying the profile of a man the world saw as unshakable. But here, under this sky, near this tide, he looked human, young, maybe even uncertain. She didn't answer right away. The waves came in, pulled out, came in again, then finally, gently. "Neither do I." She said it not like a decision, but like a truth that had been sitting inside her for days, waiting to be said aloud. For a while, they said nothing more. They didn't need to. They stood side by side, not touching, not speaking, and yet somehow closer than they had ever been. The moment didn't demand a kiss or a promise. It asked for something quieter, braver, to stay, in the stillness, in the uncertainty, together. But even as the wind wrapped around them like a veil, there was no clear path forward, because what they shared wasn't defined, wasn't named. It had begun as a lie, then it twisted into something too complex to categorize. And now, as the waves erased footprints behind them, they both knew, whatever this was, it would follow them home. When they returned to the city days later, It wasn't with clarity or commitment. It was with silence. A shared silence that lingered long after their flight landed, long after the car pulled up to the curb of the company building. No one said what would happen next, because neither of them truly knew. Back in the glass and steel fortress they called an office, everything looked the same, but everything felt different. The elevator still chimed with the same precision. The marble floors still gleamed. The receptionist still offered polite nods and filtered smiles. But beneath the cool surfaces and the hum of corporate routine, something had shifted. Something intimate. Something quietly electric. Lily walked through the halls like she always had, head up, eyes focused, steps steady. But now, there was something behind her composure. A pause in her breath when she felt him watching. A slight twitch of her lips when she heard his voice from across the floor. She didn't look at him often. Didn't have to. She felt him. The way a body feels a storm before it hits. Henry, on the other hand, played his part to perfection. He was professional, measured, exact. His emails were precise. His voice, when delegating tasks, held the same sharp clarity. But when Lily stepped into a room, his tone softened, just enough to notice. When she passed his office door, he glanced, just for a second too long. And then, there was the elevator. It was late. Most of the staff had gone home. Lily stepped in first, tablet clutched to her chest. Henry followed, silent. The doors slid closed, sealing them in a small, mirrored box of quiet tension. For a moment they said nothing. Then, without a word, he reached over and took her hand. It wasn't bold. It wasn't desperate. It was quiet. Intentional. Their fingers laced together like they had done it 1,000 times before. And then, a ding. The elevator stopped. The doors opened on the 16th floor. A junior associate stepped in, surprised to see them both. Lily stepped back slightly, and Henry, cool as ever, released her hand. But he didn't look away. He kept his eyes on her, calm, steady, soft. She didn't speak, but she smiled. Not a full smile. Not the one she gave in meetings, just a tiny curve, the kind meant only for him. Later, she'd sit at her desk and open her phone. A message from him would be there, short and unpunctuated, still thinking about the elevator. She'd type a reply. Delete it, type another, me too. She hit send. Their relationship unfolded not in grand declarations, but in spaces between moments. A glance across the table in a strategy meeting. A text at midnight asking, "Are you still awake?" A shared silence in his office. Door closed, papers forgotten. Sometimes they'd stay late, working. The room would be dim, lit only by a desk lamp. Lily would sit on the edge of the table, hair loosened, heels off, reading over a document while Henry watched her with that quiet kind of admiration he never let the world see. There were rules. They didn't talk about the relationship in the office. They didn't touch in public. They didn't stay too long in each other's gaze when others were around. And yet, it was all there. In the way he moved toward her. In the way she lingered when saying goodnight. They were a secret, but only technically. Because love like that, even wrapped in silence and professionalism, has a way of glowing at the edges. And everyone knows. The harder you try to hide something real, the more obvious it becomes. The rain had stopped, but the city was still wet with memory. Traffic hissed over damp pavement outside the office windows. Inside, the world carried on. Emails sent, coffee poured, meetings run on autopilot. But for Lily, something had shifted. She sat alone at her desk, posture upright, expression unreadable. From a distance, she looked like every other competent professional in the room. But inside, she was unraveling, quietly, invisibly, like silk being pulled thread by thread. The gala should have been a high point. Henry had made it public, his affection, his choice. He had looked at her with those steady, certain eyes and said aloud what she had only dared believe in private. For one brief moment, she had let herself breathe in it. Trust it. And then came the woman. Not cruel, not loud, just precise. She'd smiled, offered a hand, and in the span of 30 seconds, sliced through Lily's newfound confidence with a whisper dressed as kindness. "You really believed it, didn't you?" Those words, delivered with a tilt of the head and a perfectly arched brow, had stuck. Not because Lily believed her, but because a part of her already feared it might be true. That she was convenient, that she was a well-timed narrative in a suit and heels. Henry didn't notice her mood change that night. Or maybe he did, and mistook it for nerves. Either way, he hadn't asked, hadn't followed her out when she left early. And in the silence of the car ride home, Lily had stared out the window and realized something sharp. She didn't know where she stood anymore. In the following days, Henry was himself, composed, focused, increasingly visible in the press. The office buzzed with the afterglow of the gala. Investors were pleased. Shares rose. Someone joked at the water cooler about wedding bells, and Henry had smiled politely, then moved on. But Lily had begun to shrink inside the silence. She answered his texts. Mostly, she returned his glances. Barely. She smiled at the right moments, but none of them felt right anymore. And Henry, so skilled at decoding data, not emotion, didn't press. Not until 3 days later, when she missed a meeting and left early without explanation. That night, in his office, long after most had gone home, he finally said it. "Something's different." Lily stood near the window, watching the lights blink on the buildings across the street. She didn't turn to face him. "Maybe everything's exactly the same. I just stopped pretending it wasn't." The words hit harder than he expected. Henry rose slowly, taking a step toward her. "Is this about what I said at the gala?" She shook her head once, then again, then stopped. "It's not what you said, Henry. It's what you didn't say after. It's what you didn't notice." Finally, she turned, and he saw it. The weight, the wound. "I've spent my life being the person who holds it together, who keeps it professional, who doesn't ask for more. But now I'm asking, not for words, not for flowers, just for clarity." Henry swallowed. The man who could read profit projections 5 years ahead was completely unprepared for the moment staring back at him. He stepped forward. "Lily, you're not a story I wrote. You're the one I didn't see coming." A pause, then softer, like a confession, and I'm still figuring out what that means. Lily looked at him for a long time. Not angry, not hurt, just tired of carrying all the meaning alone. Then gently she picked up her bag. "Then figure it out. But not while I wait." And she left. The door didn't slam. It didn't need to. The silence left in her wake was louder than anything else in the room. Henry stood there, alone, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows, and all the success in the world, finally realizing that none of it meant anything if the one person who mattered didn't feel chosen. It started with a light on a screen. The bathroom door was closed, steam curling out from underneath, muffling the sound of running water. Her phone buzzed once, soft, barely noticeable, where it sat on the edge of the nightstand. Henry had meant to set his watch beside it. That's all. But the screen lit up, and in that unthinking second he saw it. "I'm still waiting for you to come back." Just 7 words. Brief, intimate, written like history. And even though Henry didn't know who had sent it or why, it didn't matter. Some messages don't need context. They carry weight in tone, in timing, in the way they arrive. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the still glowing screen. Then it faded to black. He didn't pick it up. He didn't knock on the bathroom door. He didn't ask. Instead, he walked out into the hallway, barefoot, shirt undone, face unreadable, and sat on the edge of the living room couch, elbows resting on his knees, gaze locked on nothing. Something inside him, the part that always needed answers, always controlled the narrative, froze. And when Lily came out minutes later, wrapped in a towel, cheeks flushed from the heat, she found the apartment too quiet, too still. Henry was standing by the window, back turned to her, the city beyond him blinking in scattered reds and blues. He didn't greet her, didn't touch her, just said, in a voice too smooth to be natural, "You should check your phone." That was all. No anger, no questions. Just that. Lily paused. She looked at him, then looked at the phone. And though she couldn't know exactly what he saw, she knew it wasn't nothing. A silence opened between them. Not loud, not dramatic, but cold, deliberate. The kind of silence that moves furniture inside your chest. For the next few days, Henry didn't mention it again. But he didn't have to. The shift was absolute. His texts grew short, his tone flat. The eye contact he used to give so generously now came in slivers, calculated and brief. In meetings, he referred to her by title. In hallways, he passed her like a stranger he couldn't afford to acknowledge. And Lily said nothing. Not because she didn't want to, but because she had already lived this scene before. The quiet trial, the withheld affection, the burden of having to prove she hadn't done anything wrong. She had learned long ago that explaining yourself to someone who's already judged you only deepens the wound. So she didn't chase him. She finished her tasks, filed her reports. She wore calm like a second skin, nodding when needed, disappearing when not. And then, on a Wednesday, when the sky was the color of ash and traffic was backed up for miles, she left her resignation letter on his desk. Printed, unfolded. No extras. Her desk was cleared by the end of the day. No one saw her leave. No one except Henry, who stepped into his office late that evening, loosened his tie, and found only an empty chair. And the unmistakable echo of his own silence, returning to him with brutal precision. He stood still, one hand on the back of the chair where she used to sit, and finally allowed the question he had refused to ask. Who was the message really from? But by then, the only one who could answer it was gone. And he, a man who had built his life on clarity and control, was left alone, staring at the space where she had once been, wondering how he had let something so real vanish in the quiet. The morning light was cruel in its honesty. Henry sat alone in his penthouse, the untouched coffee cooling beside him. His suit jacket still hung on the arm of the couch from the night before. Wrinkled, abandoned, like the apology he never made. He hadn't slept, not really. Sleep requires peace, and Henry Ford hadn't known peace since the moment she left. Since the moment he watched Lily walk out of his life without raising her voice, without demanding an explanation, just a quiet, final absence. One he had earned with silence. He had always prided himself on control, on never needing to ask questions because he already knew the answers. But this time, the answer had walked away and left a question burning in its place. It took him 2 days to stop pretending she'd come back on her own. It took 3 more to find her. When her apartment was empty, no curtains, no notes, he reached out to HR. They were hesitant, citing privacy, but one look at Henry, hollow-eyed and not quite breathing, and they gave him the last forwarding address she'd listed. It was a modest building in a quieter part of town, nothing like the sleek glass towers he was used to, The kind of place people go when they want to disappear into real life. The door was slightly ajar when he reached it. His knock went unanswered, but inside, he heard faint movement. He stepped in. The room was small, warm, lived in. A half-read book on the armrest. A plant by the window, slightly wilted but still fighting for light. And then, on the shelf by the desk, a photograph. Henry's breath caught. It was Lily. Younger, softer somehow. Smiling, and beside her, a man who looked exactly like her. Same eyes, same dimple, same smile. He wasn't a lover. He wasn't a secret. He was family. Before Henry could even take a step back, Lily's voice came from the hallway behind him. "I didn't think you'd find me." He turned. Slowly, his eyes red-rimmed, darker than usual. She was barefoot, no makeup, her hair pulled into a messy knot. But her posture, calm and straight, was that of a woman who had nothing left to explain. Henry didn't speak right away. He looked at her like someone staring into sunlight after too long in the dark. Then, with no warning, he dropped to his knees. Not out of drama, not to beg, but because he had finally run out of excuses. "I was wrong," he said simply, his voice rough. "I should have asked." Lily didn't move. Her face didn't crack, but her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "I let fear talk louder than trust," he continued, "and I let silence answer a question I never had the right to ask." He looked up at her. That message. Who was it? She inhaled, and for a long moment said nothing. The air between them throbbed with unsaid things. Then her voice, steady but threaded with pain, broke the stillness. "It was from my brother," she said. "My twin." She paused. "I found him after 12 years of thinking he was dead. That message, it was the first time he called me by the name only he used." Henry closed his eyes. The truth struck like thunder, and left only shame in its wake. Lily took a step closer, not out of pity, but because truth deserves closeness. "You didn't ask," she said softly. "You just disappeared behind your pride, like everyone else used to. Like every time in my life I needed someone to ask, and they just didn't." She knelt slowly before him, not to meet him, not to match him, but to level the field, because pain that's shared has a different weight. "I didn't leave because you doubted me," she whispered. "I left because I was tired of being the one to carry the doubt for both of us." A tear slid down his cheek, quietly. "I'm sorry," he said again. "Not for doubting you, for not fighting the part of me that did." And in that moment, neither of them said anything more. He didn't reach for her hand. She didn't fall into his arms. They just sat there. Two people on the floor, surrounded by sunlight, history, and the kind of silence that finally felt like peace. And when Lily finally stood, she didn't walk away. She waited. And Henry, for the first time, followed. The sky was soft that afternoon, muted clouds drifting over the city like worn linen. It was the kind of day no one remembered for its weather, only for what it marked. Life didn't move loudly in moments like these. It moved in small, deliberate steps. Lily had just returned from the market. Her hair was wind-blown, a paper bag cradled in her arms with a bundle of fresh rosemary poking out the top. She wasn't expecting anyone, and especially not him. But there he was. Henry stood outside her door. No driver, no pressed suit, no bouquet of apologies or dramatic gestures, just him, and something clutched in his hand. He didn't speak right away when she opened the door. His gaze was steady, searching. A flicker of fear behind it, quickly buried under the quiet resolve he'd always worn so well, until she learned how fragile it really was. She stepped aside without asking. He stepped in without assuming. The apartment was small, warm, and filled with the quiet hum of an afternoon in between. He looked around, not because he needed to, but because he hadn't earned the right to act like he belonged there. Then, carefully, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Nothing velvet, nothing branded, just a plain, square thing that felt like it had lived in his hand for too long. When he opened it, Lily blinked. The ring was crooked, bent slightly at one edge, the band uneven, the metal dull, imperfect, and full of meaning. "I tried to make it myself," he said, almost embarrassed. "It's not beautiful, not polished." He paused, eyes meeting hers. "But it's real, like us." She didn't answer. Her throat tightened. "I've never been good at making beautiful things," he continued, softer now. "But I know how to hold on to something I don't want to lose." Silence. A long, trembling silence. Then Lily laughed, quietly, suddenly, as a tear slid down her cheek. "Henry," she said, voice breaking at the edges, "we're getting a proper one too." He smiled, and it was the first true one he'd let her see in weeks. A smile without performance, without pride. Just gratitude. And she stepped forward. Not to take the ring, but to take his hand. They stood there for a long while. No speeches, no flashbulbs, no audience. Just the sound of the clock ticking in the kitchen and the smell of rosemary still clinging to her hands. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Lily didn't feel like she had to protect her heart. He was already holding it. Not perfectly, not carefully, but honestly. And that, at last, was enough. The sun dipped low across the vineyard, casting long golden shadows between rows of ripe, late-summer grapes. The wind was gentle, just enough to stir the hem of Lily's dress and lift the scent of wild lavender from the hills beyond. A canopy of string lights swayed softly overhead, crisscrossing the ceremony space like constellations woven by hand. The chairs were simple, the guests few, no flash, no spectacle, just love, raw and quiet and finally seen. Henry stood beneath the wooden arch, dressed not in some designer tux, but in a navy suit slightly wrinkled at the sleeves. His hands weren't perfectly still. His breath caught every now and then. But his eyes, they didn't leave her once. Lily walked toward him slowly, her bare shoulders glowing in the golden hour light. Her dress wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. She looked like someone who had nothing to prove, only something to promise. The world around them faded to stillness. And when they reached one another, something unspoken passed between their joined hands. A knowing. A survival. A truth stronger than vows. When it was her turn to speak, Lily didn't look at the officiant. She looked only at him. Her voice, low but unwavering, carried through the vineyard like a melody made only for dusk. "I thought I'd walked into the wrong room that night," she said, her smile trembling. "I was lost, a little drunk, a lot embarrassed, and I truly believed I'd made a mistake." She paused. A breeze lifted her hair. The guests leaned forward without realizing. "But I see now that maybe I didn't walk into the wrong room at all. Maybe I walked into the one place where someone was waiting, quietly, without even knowing it. I thought I was lost, but I had just arrived in the right heart." Henry closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they shone. He took a breath and replied, not with poetry, not with performance, but with the kind of clarity that only comes after nearly losing everything. "I never believed in fate, or signs, or magic. But I believe in that moment, in you, in what you brought into my life when I didn't even know I was starving for it. I may not always say the right thing, or feel the right way fast enough, but Lily, I will always choose you, every time, even if you walk into the wrong room again." Laughter rippled through tears. Hands reached for napkins. Someone in the back whispered, "Now that's love." They exchanged rings, one simple, one a little bent. And when Henry cupped her cheek and kissed her, it wasn't a kiss made for photos. It was one made for memory. As the lights above began to glow and the sky shifted from gold to blue, the couple walked back down the aisle hand in hand. No confetti, no fanfare, just two people who had loved through the silence, the doubt, and the long road back to each other. And somewhere behind them, a guest murmured through a smile and misty eyes, "She didn't walk into the wrong room. She walked into forever." And they all believed it, because they had seen it. And that was the story of Henry and Lily, from an awkward mistake to a love that wasn't perfect, but was real to the very end. Now it's your turn to speak up. On a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Drop your number in the comments. And if there was a moment that made you tear up or smile, don't be shy. We'd love to know. Do you believe that walking into the wrong room could lead to the love of your life? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next emotional story we share.